A town was ready to celebrate on a frozen lake everyone believed was safe, except one retired veteran's dog who refused to take another step. The deeper they looked, the more it became clear that fear, guilt, and silence were leading an entire town toward disaster. For one broken woman, one haunted veteran, and one loyal German shepherd, that frozen lake would become the place where the past came back to demand an answer, and before this day was over, someone would either die beneath the ice or finally find the courage God had been trying to awaken in them all along. Where are you watching from? And when this story ends, tell me what part stayed with you most. Please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. The snow came down in soft, windless sheets over Harbor Wren, turning the whole town white enough to hurt the eyes. Wesley Pike stood on the roof of Mrs. Donnelly's bait shop with a shovel in his gloved hands, pushing powder from the shingles in long practiced strokes while his breath fogged the air in front of him. Below, the frozen lake stretched beyond the main street like a sheet of pale glass under the winter sun, broad and bright and too still for comfort. Most people in Harbor Wren thought winter was beautiful. Wesley had spent enough years watching men die in beautiful places to know better. "Careful up there," Mrs. Donnelly shouted from the sidewalk, bundled in 3 coats and a knitted hat with a pom-pom. You fall? I'm too old to drag you out." Wesley gave her half a nod and kept shoveling. She laughed anyway. Most people laughed around Wesley when they got nervous. His silence did that to them. When he climbed down 20 minutes later, Bishop was waiting beside his truck, sitting tall in the snow with military patience. The German shepherd's black and brown coat stood out sharply against the white world around him, his amber eyes fixed on Wesley as if evaluating whether the roof had been worth the effort. "Still here?" Wesley muttered. Bishop's tail thumped once. Mrs. Donnelly pressed folded bills into Wesley's hand despite his protest. "You ever going to raise your prices?" "No." "You ever going to start talking like a normal person?" "No." That got another laugh. Wesley pocketed the cash and climbed into his truck, Bishop leaping into the passenger seat with the easy confidence of someone who had long ago decided the vehicle belonged to him. The heater rattled to life as Wesley drove through town. Harbor Wren looked postcard perfect in winter. Pine trees heavy with snow, chimneys smoking, storefronts strung with warm yellow lights for the coming festival. Families walked bundled together along the sidewalks. Kids threw snowballs near the diner. Somewhere someone had set up speakers already playing Christmas music despite it being weeks too early. Wesley drove past all of it without stopping. He lived at the far edge of town in a weather-beaten cabin where the pines thickened and the road stopped pretending to be civilized. And he preferred it that way. Quiet, distance, enough land between him and the rest of the world that he could hear trouble coming. He was halfway through unloading tools from the truck when a battered rescue SUV crunched into his driveway. Wesley closed his eyes briefly. Otis Brenner climbed out first, broad and barrel-chested in his faded yellow rescue coat, his beard carrying snowflakes like frost on wire. "You keep ignoring your phone," Otis called. "I keep doing that on purpose." Otis grunted, trudging through the snow toward him. "Need your help with the winter festival setup?" "No? You don't even know what I'm asking." "Yes, I do." Otis stopped in front of him, breath steaming. "We need radios checked. Backup generators, too." "A couple of the snowmobiles won't start." "That's maintenance." "And?" "I'll do maintenance." Otis studied him. "Need more than that." Wesley turned back to unloading his toolbox. "Then hire someone else." Otis's voice softened. "Wes, no." The word came sharper than intended. Silence settled between them, broken only by wind through the pines. Otis nodded slowly, like a man used to pushing against locked doors. "Fine, maintenance only." He reached into his pocket and tossed Wesley a ring of keys. "Equipment shed. Get there before noon." Then he walked back to his SUV without another word. Wesley stared after him until the vehicle disappeared down the road. Bishop came to stand beside him, shoulder brushing his leg. "I said no," Wesley muttered. The dog leaned harder, as if disagreeing. And the old Ellison house sat empty at the north edge of town for 3 years before Mara returned. People noticed the moment her SUV rolled into Harbor Wren. They noticed because people in small towns noticed everything. They noticed because grief left fingerprints, and everyone remembered the day Evan Mercer died on the lake. Mara saw them staring as she parked in front of the house she'd grown up in. She ignored them. The place looked smaller than memory, older, sadder. Snow drifted against the porch steps where her father used to sit with coffee every morning. The windows reflected the frozen lake beyond the road. She kept her eyes off the water. Her boots crunched over the path as she carried the first box inside. Dust and cold greeted her in equal measure. And she set the box down in the front room and stood very still. Just sell it, she told herself. Clean it out, sign papers, leave. No staying, no remembering. Outside, laughter drifted from the direction of the lake. Festival prep. Her stomach tightened. She shut the front curtains. By late afternoon, Wesley had spent 4 hours in the rescue equipment shed replacing wiring, tightening generator belts, and muttering at machinery older than some of the volunteers using it. Otis returned with coffee and a clipboard. "You know," Otis said casually, "Mara Ellison's back." Wesley kept working. "Didn't think you'd care." "I don't," Otis sipped his coffee. "Town's already talking. Town always talks." Otis leaned against the workbench. She's here to sell the old house, supposedly." Wesley tightened the last bolt on the generator. "Good for her." Otis watched him a moment. "You remember what happened out there?" It wasn't a question. Wesley's jaw tightened. Everybody remembered. He straightened, wiping grease from his hands. "I remember enough to know people should stop turning tragedy into gossip." Otis raised both palms. "Fair." Then Bishop, lying by the open garage door, lifted his head sharply. Every muscle in the dog's body changed. Wesley saw it instantly. "What is it?" Bishop was already moving. He shot from the shed into the snow at full speed. "Bishop!" Wesley ran after him. The dog tore toward the lakefront road, ears pinned, eyes fixed ahead, and then Wesley saw her. As a woman stood near the edge of the frozen shoreline, one hand braced against a signpost, breathing too fast, staring at the vast white lake like it had reached up from the earth to drag her backward in time. Mara Ellison. She hadn't stepped onto the ice. She wasn't in danger, but she looked like she might collapse anyway. A crack echoed somewhere across the frozen lake. Distant, low, the natural groan of shifting winter ice. Mara flinched violently. Bishop slowed. Then, instead of barking or circling, the dog approached her carefully and sat down directly in front of her in the snow. Still, silent, watching. Mara stared, her breathing hitched again. Bishop did not move. He simply stayed there, solid, calm, immovable. And the same way he had stayed beside Wesley on nights when waking from old nightmares left his hands shaking too badly to hold a glass of water. Mara's shoulders trembled. Then, slowly, very slowly, her breathing began to even out. Wesley stopped 10 feet away. Neither of them spoke. After a long moment, Mara whispered, "He does this often?" "Only when he thinks someone needs it." She looked up then. For the first time, their eyes met. Her face was pale from cold, and something deeper than cold. Smart eyes. Tired eyes, the kind that had seen enough pain to stop pretending otherwise. "I'm fine," she said. Wesley nodded once. He knew a lie when he heard one. Bishop remained seated until Mara's hands stopped shaking. Only then did he rise and return to Wesley's side. Mara watched the dog like she'd just witnessed something she couldn't explain. That evening, the town council gathered in the community hall to finalize festival plans. Wesley stayed only because Otis insisted the generators needed to be signed off in person. He stood near the back wall with Bishop lying at his boots while townspeople argued over vendor spaces and parking permits. Then Otis cleared his throat. "One more thing. We've had reports of weak ice pockets north of the main route." Murmurs spread instantly. Grant Voss stood from his chair near the front. He was polished as ever in his expensive winter coat, every blonde hair in place. "My company surveyed the route twice," he said smoothly. HLE. "All readings are within safety standards." Deputy Nora Bell frowned from her seat, flipping through paperwork. "There were some inconsistencies in the northern measurements." "Minor ones," Grant replied. "Normal, seasonal variation." Otis didn't look convinced, neither did Wesley, but Nora finally set the papers down. "If the survey stands, we proceed." The room relaxed. Conversation moved on. Only Bishop didn't. The dog had risen to his feet. He stood perfectly still near the window, ears forward, staring through the glass toward the frozen northern stretch of lake. Wesley followed his gaze. The white expanse gleamed beneath the dying light, silent, beautiful. And for reasons he could not explain, the hairs on the back of Wesley's neck stood up. Bishop gave one low, uneasy whine. Wesley looked at the lake, then at the dog, and for the first time that winter, he wondered if something out there was wrong. The next morning, Bishop refused to walk the usual route. Wesley noticed it before they reached the lake. The dog's pace shortened. His ears stayed forward. Twice he stopped outright and planted his paws in the snow, staring toward the northern stretch of white beyond town. "Come on," Wesley muttered, giving the leash a light tug. Bishop moved, but reluctantly, every step stiff with resistance. The lake lay under a pale blue sky, flat and bright enough to make Wesley squint. Harbor Wren's festival crews were already out there, hammering stakes into the ice, setting lantern posts and temporary rope lines while snowmobiles hauled crates of decorations farther onto the frozen surface. The whole scene looked cheerful from a distance. It felt wrong anyway. Bishop's hackles rose. Then the dog abruptly veered sideways and pulled Wesley off the marked shoreline path. Wesley stopped. He followed Bishop's line of sight. Nothing, just snow. But beneath the wind, beneath the scrape of workers and engines, he thought he heard it. A faint, irregular groan somewhere under the northern flats. Not the normal long-settling moan of winter ice. Something sharper, more fractured. His jaw tightened. By noon, Wesley was knee-deep in extension cords and generator housings behind the main festival platform when voices drifted from the warming tent nearby. "If this gets canceled, I'm done till spring." He glanced over. Tessa Ward stood just inside the tent flap, red knit sweater visible beneath her coat, jangling her enormous ring of inn keys as she paced. And around her were 3 other business owners: coffee vendor, bait shop owner, motel manager, faces lined with the kind of worry that had nothing to do with weather. "No tourists means no bookings," Tessa said. "No bookings means I lose the place. My dad built that inn with his own hands." The others murmured agreement. "Otis is overreacting," someone muttered. "Grant says the route's fine." "It has to be fine." Wesley kept tightening bolts, but his movement slowed. There it was. Not denial. Need. People weren't ignoring the danger because they were stupid. They were ignoring it because some truths cost too much to admit. Bishop sat beside him, watching the tent as if he understood every word. Otis found Wesley an hour later carrying a battered metal lockbox full of old maps and survey binders. "She's not answering my calls," he grunted. "Who?" "Mara." Wesley kept working. Otis dropped the box onto the workbench. "She used to read ice better than anyone in this town." "She quit." "So did you." Wesley shot him a look. Otis ignored it. "I need someone who knows what they're looking at. Grant's survey numbers don't sit right with me." He flipped open the lockbox. Inside were years of laminated route maps, weather notes, and ice depth charts. Wesley stared at them longer than he meant to, then sighed. "Fine." Otis blinked. "Fine? I'll take them to her. Doesn't mean she'll help." Otis gave the faintest smile. "Didn't think you'd volunteer." "I didn't." The Ellison house looked lonelier in daylight. Snow had drifted high against the porch and the curtains were still drawn. Wesley knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Then the door opened just enough for Mara Ellison to glare through the gap, hair tied back carelessly, face pale from cold and interrupted solitude. "What?" Wesley held up the lockbox. "Otis wants your opinion." "No." "He said you'd say that." "Then he should have believed me the first time." She started closing the door. Wesley spoke before he could stop himself. "If the route's bad and nobody catches it, someone gets killed." The door stopped. Mara's jaw tightened. For a moment she looked not angry, but tired in a way anger couldn't reach. "That stopped being my problem 3 years ago." Wesley met her eyes. "Funny. I used to say the same thing." Silence. Then Mara looked past him. At Bishop. The dog sat quietly beside Wesley, snow gathering along the black ridge of his back, amber eyes fixed on her with that same unnerving calm from yesterday. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. 5 minutes, she muttered. They spread the survey maps across her dining table. Dusty winter light filtered through the curtains. Old family photographs still hung crooked on the walls, untouched by time or grief. Mara stood over the papers with her arms crossed at first, distant and defensive. Then she leaned closer, then closer still. Her expression changed. "Where did Grant get this route?" she asked. Otis frowned. Current approved line." "No." Mara jabbed a finger at the map. "This isn't the old approved line. It's shifted north by almost 40 yards. Otis blinked. "Why would he move it?" Wesley answered before she could. "Better view of the lake." Mara nodded grimly. "And closer to the clear flats for photos. Tourists love open ice." She pulled another map from the bottom of the stack, a faded survey from years prior. "See this?" she said, pointing to a shaded crescent near the northern flats. "Subsurface current channel, warm movement under the ice. It freezes thinner here every winter." Otis stared. Grant's new route cut directly across it. The room went still. Then Mara's voice dropped. "That stretch should have been permanently marked off after—" She stopped. "After Evan." Nobody said his name. And Bishop rose from the floor and quietly moved to her side. Not touching. Just there. Mara swallowed hard and stepped back from the table. "I'm done," she said. Wesley frowned. "Done? I told you what you needed. You need to come show us." "No?" "Mara," her voice cracked sharp enough to stop him. "I said no." The room went silent except for the ticking wall clock. Then she looked at Wesley. Not angry now, but raw. "You think because I can explain it on paper that means I can walk back out there?" she whispered. "I can't even hear the lake crack without feeling like I'm back on my knees watching someone disappear into black water." Wesley said nothing, because there was nothing honest to say that wouldn't sound hollow. She turned away. "Take the maps. Get out." Deputy Nora Bell met them outside the town office 2 hours later, snow dusting the shoulders of her sheriff's coat. She flipped through Grant's paperwork while Wesley and Otis stood beside her, her sharp gray eyes narrowed. "This survey metadata's wrong." Otis frowned. "Wrong how?" She turned the clipboard around. "Timestamp says last January." Wesley's expression hardened. "He reused the old report." Nora's mouth thinned. "Edited it, too. Some measurements changed manually." Otis swore under his breath. "So shut it down," Wesley said. Nora looked up. "I can't." He stared at her. "Not yet," she clarified. "Paper irregularities aren't enough to cancel a public event this size, not without field confirmation. And if I shut it down on suspicion alone, the town council overturns me in an hour." Otis rubbed his face. "So we verify it ourselves." Nora nodded. "Officially, I never said that." She handed the clipboard back. "Bring me proof." The next morning dawned white and brutally still. Wesley was loading rope Itini spikes and measuring poles into Otis's rescue sled when he heard boots crunching behind him. He turned. Mara stood there in her blue-gray field jacket, camera strap hanging against her chest, gloves half-buttoned like she'd dressed in a hurry and nearly changed her mind 3 times. Wesley stared. "I'm not leading," she said immediately. "Didn't ask you to. I'm not going past the shoreline if I can't." He nodded once. That seemed enough. Bishop stepped to her first, and she looked down as the dog pressed briefly against her leg before moving back beside Wesley. A strange, fragile understanding passed through her face. Then the 4 of them, Wesley, Otis, Mara, and Bishop, walked onto the lake. The ice boomed softly beneath them. Mara flinched, but kept moving. Snow stretched endless around them, wind carving silver patterns over the flats. Halfway to the northern road, Bishop stopped, every muscle in his body locked. A low growl vibrated in his chest. Then he yanked hard sideways on the leash. Wesley stumbled with him. "What?" Bishop dragged him 2 full steps off the marked line. Mara's eyes dropped to the snow, then all color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. She crouched immediately, brushing snow aside with gloved hands. And underneath lay a patch of ice smooth as polished glass, too smooth, too white, too perfect, false safe ice. Her breathing caught. Wesley saw the terror hit her before the words came. "That's what it looked like," she whispered, staring at it. "The day Evan died." Silence fell across the frozen lake. Wind moved softly through their jackets. No one spoke, because suddenly they all understood the same thing. If the festival opened on this route, people were going to die. By 3 o'clock, the community hall was full enough to feel smaller than it was. Snow melted from boots onto the wooden floor. Coats steamed on chairbacks. People stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the old rafters, speaking in low, tense voices while the winter sun faded behind the frosted windows. Wesley stood near the back with Bishop at his side. Mara sat 2 rows ahead, her hands folded tightly around the strap of her camera. She had not looked toward the lake once since they came inside. Deputy Nora Bell stood at the front beside Otis, holding Grant's paperwork in one hand and the older maps in the other. "We have reason to believe the northern section of the festival route may be unsafe," Nora said. The room stirred. Grant Voss rose before she could continue. With respect, Deputy, that's not what the official readings show." Nora's eyes narrowed. "The readings you submitted appear to be from last year." Grant smiled, but the smile had no warmth in it. "The lake follows similar freeze patterns every season. We updated where necessary. You manually changed measurements. I corrected them." Otis stepped forward. "We found false safe ice on the proposed route this morning." That quieted the room for half a second. Then the questions started. "How bad? Where exactly? Are you canceling the whole thing?" Tessa Ward stood near the aisle, her red sweater bright under her open coat, the keys to her inn trembling in one hand. "If you cancel this festival," she said, voice shaking, "some of us don't recover. I don't mean we lose a little money. I mean, we close." No one answered her, because everyone knew she was right. Grant turned toward the room, sensing the opening. "No one here wants anyone hurt, but we can't let fear ruin the town's biggest event based on one patch of questionable ice and old memories." Mara went still. Wesley saw it. So did Bishop. An older man near the coffee table muttered, not quietly enough, "Maybe old memories are the problem." Another voice followed. "She was there last time, wasn't she?" Mara's face drained. Grant did not stop them. He only lowered his eyes, as if the cruelty had nothing to do with him. Tessa looked ashamed, but she said nothing. Wesley pushed off the back wall. "That's enough." His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. The room quieted. Wesley looked at Grant first, then at the others. "You want to argue money, argue money. You want to argue measurements, argue measurements. But don't put a dead man in her mouth because you're scared to look at a map." Nobody moved. Mara stood suddenly, chair scraping hard against the floor. "I shouldn't have come," she said. Then she walked out. Bishop took one step after her. Wesley held up a hand, stopping him. For once, the dog obeyed reluctantly. Wesley found Mara at the old Ellison house just before dark. The curtains were open now. Inside, through the front window, he could see photographs spread across the dining table. Lake ice, rescue teams, orange ropes, white fields, faces caught in moments before everything changed. He knocked. No answer. Then Mara's voice came from inside. It's open." Wesley stepped in with Bishop beside him. The house smelled of dust, old wood, and cold coffee. Mara sat on the floor beside a cardboard box surrounded by photographs. Her camera lay across her knees like something too heavy to lift. "I told Otis everything he needed," she said without looking up. "Not everything." She gave a bitter laugh. "You soldiers always think there's one more thing to extract." Wesley let the words pass. Bishop moved quietly to the edge of the room and lay down, resting his muzzle on his paws. Mara picked up a photograph. A younger version of her stood on the lake beside a man in a red rescue jacket, both of them squinting against wind. The man had one hand raised as if telling the photographer to stop. Evan hated having his picture taken," she said. Wesley stayed by the doorway. "He was stubborn?" he asked. "The worst." A small smile appeared, then broke. He thought courage meant going one step farther than everyone else. She turned the photograph over in her hand. "The day he died, I saw the weak section. I did. I marked it. I told him not to cross there." Her voice thinned. "But there was a man trapped beyond it, a tourist, grown man, panicking so badly he was crawling the wrong way." She swallowed. "Evan went around the marker, said he could make it if he stayed low." Wesley's gaze dropped to Bishop's collar. "Stay low." Mara saw him look. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry yet. I yelled once, maybe twice. I don't remember. In my head, I've yelled 1,000 times since then. Louder, angrier, better. She pressed the photograph against her knee. That's the part nobody understands. I didn't miss the danger. I saw it. And he still went. Wesley said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the wind brushed snow against the windows. Then he reached beneath the collar of his shirt and pulled out the old metal whistle hanging there. Mara looked at it. Rescue whistle? She asked. Belonged to a man named Cole Haskins. He turned it once between his fingers. Last mission I ever worked, we had 2 wounded on opposite sides of a collapsed street. One was breathing, one was calling my name. Mara's face changed. Wesley kept his eyes on the whistle because it was easier than looking at her. I went to the one I thought I could save. I was right. He lived. His thumb stilled against the metal. The other one didn't. Neither of them moved. I know what it feels like, he said quietly, to make the best call you can and still spend every night wondering if a better man would have found a third choice. Mara looked away. The silence between them was no longer empty. It had weight now. Shape. Bishop rose and walked over, not to Wesley, but to Mara. This time he didn't sit in front of her like a guard. He rested his head lightly against her arm. Mara closed her eyes. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then one tear slipped down her cheek. I hate that lake, she whispered. Wesley nodded. I don't blame you. I hate that I still know how to read it. That might be the reason someone lives. She opened her eyes and looked at him. And not comforted, not healed, but listening. The next morning, Nora called another smaller meeting at the sheriff's office. Mara did not come at first. Grant did. So did Otis, Tessa, 3 council members, and Wesley, who stood with arms folded near the back while Bishop waited beside the door. Nora laid the paperwork on the table. Without a full field report, I can suspend only the northern extension, not the entire festival. Grant leaned forward. That extension is the festival. It's where the view opens up. It's where the ice thins, Otis snapped. Grant looked around the room. Are we really going to destroy the town's winter income over fear? Tessa's keys jingled again. She looked exhausted. I don't want anyone hurt, she said. But I don't know how to pay my staff if we lose this weekend. The door opened. Mara stood there, pale but upright, camera slung over her shoulder and a folder tucked under one arm. Every head turned. She hesitated only once. Then she walked in and placed the folder on Nora's desk. These are comparison shots, she said. Old route, new route, current snow cover, current surface distortion. If you want field confirmation, I'll give it. Grant's jaw tightened. Mara... She turned to him. No. One word, flat, final. He stopped. Mara looked at Nora next. I'm not promising I can walk the whole route. I'm not promising I won't panic, but I know what that ice is doing. Her fingers tightened on the folder. And I'm done letting people call fear the same thing as weakness. Wesley watched her from across the room. For the first time since she returned to Harbor Wren, Mara Ellison looked like someone who had chosen where to stand. Not because she was unafraid, because she was tired of running. The morning of the promotional run arrived bright and bitterly cold. The kind of cold that made the inside of your nose sting when you breathed and turned every sound sharper than it should be. Harbor Wren gathered along the shoreline anyway. Tourists in rented parkas posed for photos. Volunteers hauled lantern frames and speaker equipment across the marked route. Someone passed out paper cups of coffee from a folding table while Grant Voss walked the ice with a tablet in one hand and a smile too polished for the weather. This is controlled, he kept saying to anyone who questioned him. A limited demonstration only. We're proving the route is stable. Wesley stood near the rescue trailer with his jaw locked so tightly it hurt. Otis was beside him in full winter rescue gears. A deputy Nora had stationed herself near the shoreline with 2 deputies and an expression that suggested she already regretted not shutting the entire thing down by force. Mara stood farther back than everyone else, arms folded tight against her chest, pale enough that the freckles across her nose stood out. She had come because she said someone needed to document what happened if Grant ignored the warnings. No one had asked what she meant by if. Bishop sat at Wesley's side, still, watching. The dog had not taken his eyes off the northern route since they arrived. Then Calvin Reed stepped onto the ice. He was a wiry man in his 30s with a patchy beard, bright orange work gloves, and the distracted urgency of someone more concerned with his task than his surroundings. And he hauled a sled loaded with compact speaker towers and LED floodlights, muttering curses every time the runners snagged in fresh snow. "Need that rig at marker 4 before noon," Grant shouted. Calvin waved without looking up. He followed the flagged route at first, then wind swept hard across the lake. A gust lifted loose snow and dragged it sideways in pale ribbons. When it settled, several of the smaller red route markers vanished beneath fresh drift. Mara went rigid. "Grant," she said sharply. Too late. Calvin adjusted his sled line and stepped 5 feet left to avoid a buried cable. The sound that followed was small, almost delicate, a crisp, brittle crack beneath snow. Wesley was already moving before anyone else understood what they'd heard. "Calvin!" The man froze. And the ice under him shattered. He dropped straight through. The sled tipped sideways and vanished after him in an explosion of black water and white spray. For half a second, the entire shoreline stood motionless. Then chaos erupted. People screamed. Someone dropped a coffee tray. Grant staggered backward, face gone bloodless. "Get back!" Otis roared. Calvin surfaced once, choking violently, clawing at the ice edge with gloved hands already slipping. The hole widened with each desperate movement. Wesley ripped off his outer coat as he ran. "Rope!" Otis threw one. Bishop exploded beside him without command. Wesley hit the ice flat on his stomach, sliding forward with the rope clipped around his harness belt. The frozen surface groaned beneath him. Wind tore at his sleeves. And Calvin was thrashing now, panic overtaking reason. "Look at me!" Wesley shouted. Calvin screamed something incoherent. "Stop kicking or you'll break more!" Bishop paced parallel 10 yards to Wesley's right, low and tense, staying off the direct fracture line exactly as he'd been trained years before Wesley ever knew him. Behind them, the crowd shouted over one another. Nobody was listening, nobody except Mara. She stared at the spreading cracks, at the snow patterns, at the way the dark fractures beneath the surface bent left instead of right. And suddenly, she wasn't seeing today anymore. She was seeing red rescue jackets. She was hearing Evan yell her name through white wind. She was on her knees again with her hands bleeding on ice that would not hold, her breathing hitched. And her vision tunneled. No, not again, not like this. Then Wesley slipped. His bad shoulder buckled when Calvin seized his forearm in blind panic and yanked downward. Wesley slid 6 inches toward the hole. The rope snapped taut. His face twisted in pain. Something in Mara broke loose. "No!" The word ripped out of her before she realized she'd spoken. Every head turned. She was already moving. "Triangle anchor!" she screamed, voice raw but cutting through the panic. "Wide formation! Now, not straight line! You'll collapse the sheet!" Otis reacted instantly. "You heard her! Move!" Volunteers scrambled. Mara ran onto the ice before her fear could stop her. Each step felt like stepping directly into memory. She dropped to her knees beside the rope line, pointing with shaking hands. Otis, left 10 feet, wider, wider." The rescue volunteers repositioned. "Deputy, get everyone off the eastern flank." Nora barked orders. The shoreline began to clear. Bishop lunged forward suddenly as Wesley slid another inch. The dog seized the trailing secondary line in his jaws and planted all 4 paws into the ice, body low and rigid, muscles straining. Not enough to stop Wesley alone. Enough to slow him. Enough. "Calvin!" Wesley shouted through gritted teeth. "Grab the rope, not me!" The man was barely coherent, lips blue, eyes wild. Mara crawled closer than she thought she could, closer than she had ever come to broken ice since Evan died. Her lungs burned. Her hands shook so violently she could barely point. "Oh, Wesley, 3 inches right! There's stronger layering under you. Right!" He obeyed instantly. The ice beneath his chest held. He shifted, threw the rope loop. Calvin missed. Wesley threw again. This time Calvin got it. "Pull!" Otis and the volunteers hauled. The triangle anchor held. Calvin came out of the water inch by inch, screaming from cold and terror, until at last Wesley and Otis grabbed his jacket and dragged him fully onto solid ice. "Move! Move! Move!" They all crawled backward together. Nobody stood until they reached shore. Then the crowd erupted into frantic noise. Paramedics rushed Calvin away wrapped in blankets. Grant stood frozen where he was, staring at the broken lake like it had betrayed him personally. But Wesley never looked at him, because Bishop was limping. The dog stumbled the final few feet toward him, then sat hard in the snow. Blood stained the white beneath one foreleg. A sharp slice across the paw pad, deep enough that the edge of the broken ice had nearly peeled skin back. "Damn it, Bishop!" Wesley dropped beside him immediately. The dog whined once, quietly, but did not pull away. Dr. Paul Renner appeared almost at once from the gathered crowd, his vet bag already in hand, spectacles fogging in the cold. "Let me see him." Wesley stepped back just enough. Paul knelt in snow without hesitation, examining the paw. "Bad cut. Not catastrophic. He'll need stitches." Bishop's ears flattened, more annoyed than afraid. Only then did Wesley finally exhale. Across the shoreline, silence began spreading, because now everyone could see the hole. And could see how close it had come, could see the shattered route markers disappearing into black water where children and tourists would have walked tomorrow. No one argued. No one defended Grant. Tessa Ward stood with both hands over her mouth, tears freezing on her cheeks. Grant looked around the shoreline and seemed to understand all at once that no explanation he gave now would matter. Mara remained kneeling near the edge of the ice, chest heaving. She stared at her own trembling hands, then at the rescue lines, then at the hole, and slowly, very slowly, she stood. Wesley looked at her across the snow. Neither spoke. They didn't need to, because both of them knew what had just happened. She had gone back onto the ice. And this time, someone came home. The festival was canceled before sunset, not postponed, not rerouted. Canceled. By evening, Harbor Wren's main street looked like a place after a storm. Half-packed booths, abandoned crates, strings of lanterns hanging unlit in the cold. Workers dismantled signs in silence while news of the accident spread through town faster than the wind. No one argued anymore, not after they had seen the black water swallowing the route with their own eyes. Grant Voss stood before the town council the next morning, looking 10 years older than he had the day before. His expensive coat was gone, replaced by a plain wool jacket that fit him badly. His hair was unstyled. His voice cracked twice before he got through his statement. I ignored warnings I should not have ignored," he said, staring down at the table instead of at anyone in the room. "I altered the route to improve visibility for tourists and approved setup before the final safety review. That decision nearly killed a man." No one interrupted. Grant swallowed hard. "I accept suspension of my operating license and full financial liability for rescue costs." He paused, then looked up. "I'm sorry." The room stayed quiet. Sorry did not rebuild trust. Sorry did not erase what almost happened, but at least for the first time, no one had to drag the truth out of him. People in Harbor Wren did not speak much for the next few days, not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. At Tessa Ward's Inn, guests canceled their reservations one by one. Tessa sat behind the front desk, staring at her ledger with red eyes and hands wrapped around coffee gone cold. When Wesley stopped by to fix a frozen boiler pipe, she didn't look up at first. "I knew something felt wrong," she said eventually. Wesley kept working. "I kept telling myself I couldn't afford to ask too many questions." He tightened the wrench. She laughed once, bitterly. "Turns out I couldn't afford not to." Wesley glanced at her. That was the thing about guilt. It rarely belonged to one person alone. Dr. Paul Renner stitched Bishop's paw in the warmth of his veterinary clinic while the dog endured the process with stoic irritation. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, and cedar shavings. As snow clung to Wesley's boots in thawing puddles beneath the metal exam table, Paul tied off the final stitch and wrapped the paw carefully. "He'll limp for a week," the vet said. "No lake work, no heroics." Bishop huffed in obvious disagreement. Wesley scratched behind the dog's ear. "You hear that? Doctor's orders." Paul removed his glasses and wiped them with the corner of his shirt. Then he looked at Wesley with the kind of directness older men earned when they stopped caring whether people liked what they said. "You know," he murmured, "dogs like him don't follow men into danger because they're trained to." Wesley frowned. "That's exactly why they do." Paul shook his head. "No, training teaches obedience. Loyalty is something else." He nodded toward Bishop. "That animal planted himself on breaking ice because he believes with his whole body that where you go is where he should be." Wesley said nothing. Paul met his eyes. "The question is whether you still believe you're worth following." The room went still. Wesley looked down at Bishop. The dog sat calmly on the table despite the fresh bandage, amber eyes fixed on him as if no further explanation were needed. Wesley looked away first. 3 days later, Deputy Nora Bell arrived at Wesley's cabin with a folder thick enough to matter. Snow powdered her dark sheriff's coat. Her expression was the same as always, practical, unsentimental, tired in the eyes. "We're drafting new winter safety regulations," she said without preamble. Wesley leaned against the porch post. "Oh, sounds thrilling." She ignored him. "Mandatory ice inspection protocols, emergency route markers, public reporting system, volunteer rescue certification requirements." He understood where this was going before she said it. "No." Nora exhaled through her nose. "I haven't asked yet." "You're about to. We need someone to help train the volunteer teams, someone who understands field rescue and won't panic on the lake." "Find someone else." "There isn't someone else." Wesley folded his arms. Nora stepped closer. "This town nearly watched a man die because people with half your experience were making decisions without you. That's not my responsibility." "Maybe not." Her voice softened. "But it could be." He did not answer. Nora handed him the folder anyway. "I'll ask again Monday." Then she turned and left. Wesley stood on the porch for a long time with the folder in his hands and Bishop leaning against his leg. He didn't open it. Mara Ellison canceled the sale of her father's house the following week. By the weekend, the "for sale" sign was gone. In its place stood a temporary wooden board with hand-painted letters, Ellison Winter Survey and Field Imaging. Wesley stared at it from across the road. Mara noticed him and stepped out onto the porch. Her cheeks were pink from cold, hair tied back under a knit cap, sleeves rolled despite the weather, while she hammered nails into a side-mounted equipment rack. "You're staring," she said. "You staying?" She nodded. "For now." He glanced at the sign again. "Thought you were done with the lake." She smiled faintly. "I'm done pretending running from it is the same as healing." Wesley looked at her a moment, then nodded once. That was enough. Harbor Wren held its replacement gathering the next Saturday. No one called it a festival, maybe because the word felt dishonest now. Instead, people lit lanterns along the shoreline path and set up tables beneath the pine trees, keeping everything on solid land. There were hot drinks and stew and music from an old speaker someone balanced on a sled, smaller than before, quieter, realer. Snow fell in soft, drifting sheets while townspeople moved beneath golden light and breath fog. Children laughed near the bonfire. And Tessa handed out free cider because she said no one should waste apples over a canceled booking sheet. Grant came too, not at the center, not speaking much. He helped carry tables, hauled firewood, took orders from people who no longer treated him like the smartest man in the room. No one forgave him, but no one ignored him either. Consequences, Wesley thought, were heavier when you had to keep living among the people you failed. He stood near the edge of the shoreline with Bishop beside him, the dog's bandaged paw lifted slightly off the snow whenever he forgot himself. Out on the lake, moonlight reflected pale and endless across the frozen surface. Beautiful, still dangerous, still honest. Otis approached carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and handed one over. Thought I'd find you brooding out here. Thinking. Same thing with you." They stood in silence for a while. Then Otis nodded toward the folder tucked beneath Wesley's arm. "So?" Wesley did not answer. Otis smirked faintly. "That a yes?" Wesley looked down at Bishop. The dog met his gaze. Then, with solemn dignity, Bishop thumped his tail once against the snow. Wesley laughed. A real one this time. Brief, low, rusty from disuse. It startled even him. Otis heard it and smiled. "Well?" Wesley looked back toward the lanterns, the townspeople, the shoreline where no one was pretending danger did not exist anymore. Then he looked at the lake, then at the dog who had followed him into every hard thing without asking whether the road was worth it. He drew a breath. "Yeah," he said quietly. Otis waited. Wesley's mouth twitched into the first genuine smile he had worn in years. "Tell them I'll be there Monday." Snow drifted down around them. Behind him, laughter carried warm through the trees. Beside him, Bishop leaned against his leg, and for the first time in a very long while, Wesley did not feel like a man standing outside his own life. He felt like someone finally stepping back into it. Sometimes courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to step forward while fear is still in your chest. This story reminds us that surviving pain is not the end of healing. Real healing begins when we stop running from what hurt us and decide to live with purpose again. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts below. What part stayed with you the most? And if you believe second chances can still find us, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. May you find the strength to keep walking toward the life waiting for you.